Winter Roses, Summer by Fairytalelovr. Chapter 3, Cleaning House. Ned made his way through the corridors with a heavy heart. Having dispensed with at least a quarter of the servants while a wedding was coming up, and the Northern Lords were on their way. He should have kept a closer look. He should have at least suspected something. But he had chosen to trust his wife.
I meddled where I could, my lord, Vaon Paul, the castle steward, confessed. I had new clothes made for the boy. Bought new clothes with other household funds. But I couldn't very well go against my lady. Lady Stark said to be subtle, so that you wouldn't notice, my lord, the butler had said. So I did enough so that she would notice, but then had something else brought to the boy later. Sometimes I take something to his room myself. She was especially hard after lessons. If Lord John was better at a lesson than Lord Rob, she'd tell me to put too much salt or make sure he couldn't eat whatever little she allowed me to put in the plate that he'd eat in front of you, my lord. The boy learnt fast not to be better than Lord Rob. I told him not to eat a supper so that she would get her wishes, and then come to the kitchen later.
I always have food for him when he comes asking, my lord, the cook had added. Such a kind boy. Was crying the first time he came. The poor little child. Little more than a toddler he was, right after Lady Catelyn ran his nurse from here. So shy and kind, asking for an old loaf of bread, and his little tummy was rumbling more than the clouds in a storm. Most of the kitchen servants know better than to tell Lady Stark we give him food. Sometimes, if you leave breakfast early, she'll forbid the boy to eat until supper, and she said to never give him dessert or any other delicacies. Ned had debated what to do for almost an hour after the servants had left. Having reached a decision, he made his way to his son's room with a heavy heart. He heard low voices behind the door, and frowned. There was a sudden silence at his knock, and after a moment John opened the door, clearly startled.
Father! What? Has something happened?
Ned frowned.
No, I merely wish to speak with you. May I come in?
John was even more startled.
I could come to your study. No need for you to come here.
Ned clenched his jaw. By the way he said here, it seemed like John's bedroom was the most unsuitable place for a conversation.
No need. I wish to speak with you, and I'm already here.
John looked like a scared deer.
What is the matter? Who is in there?
What?
I heard voices as I came. Who is in there with you?
The boy sighed, but let his head fall forward in defeat for a moment, before reluctantly stepping back and letting him in. Ned raised an eyebrow in question, and a small wave of disappointment came up as he saw Daenerys' silver hair and the girl sitting on the narrow bed. But then he saw Sansa sitting next to her, and he knew his worries were misplaced. His daughter was wide-eyed, her needle frozen in mid-air, as what he recognised as a jerkin rested in her lap. "Father!" she stuttered. "Why, you won't tell Mother, will you?"
He frowned. What exactly would I tell her? And what are you doing?
It's my fault, Father. I asked Daenerys to help me, but I'm terrible with a needle, so I asked Sansa. I mean, I only help when I... They started talking on top of each other, as if they needed to cover their backs and protect each other from a scolding. Ned raised a hand, silencing them.
From what I see, Sansa is mending. Why?
I was careless at practice today. John was clearly embarrassed to admit.
The seam gave in, but I really don't know what to do with a needle.
So Sansa was scared. I just mend them sometimes, Father. John won't even ask me unless it becomes impossible to be worn again. Usually it's Daenerys who comes to get me, because he doesn't want to bother us for asking for help. But if Mother, she won't let me help him. She forbade me to even talk to him. Ned clenched his jaw. In one day, he was apparently finding out all that was wrong within his household. It seemed like he was just too blind or too uninterested to see it before.
I won't tell her, nor will I scold you. Praise you, rather, for helping your brother. but you don't need to mend for John anymore.
Sansa seemed invigorated by the praise. But Mother won't allow. I mean, there's no one else to do it, Father.
John has a servant to do it.
Mother forbade Robb's attendant to help John. I heard it, and I heard her order Paul punished when he tried to help.
John has his own attendant now. I just gave the order.
There was a moment of silence at the implication.
Girls, I would like to talk to my son. Could you excuse us?
They stood from the bed. I'll take this with me. I'm almost done. And if I stop now, it'll just have to be done all over again, Sansa said, taking the jerkin. Ned had to step out of the room for the girls to leave, and he closed the door behind himself as he walked back in. John was standing next to the chest, looking scared, with his cloak on, though he'd removed his jerkin. It looked like he didn't have a second one. Ned looked around. The bed was narrow, and didn't look as comfortable as his own. The linen certainly looked coarser. He could see that the furs were matted, not having been aired in a while, and not tidy enough for the bed to have been made by a maid. There was a small tree trunk, roughly cut, that was serving as a bedside table, with a few books on top of it. The small chest could barely fit anything, but a second pair of boots stood next to it, instead of inside it. The fireplace was unlit, though it was quite chilly.
Why don't you have a fire going? I'm not cold, Father,
John muttered so quietly Ned almost didn't hear. He frowned, confused.
Then why are you wearing your cloak inside? We are during the time of summer snows, but the castle is warm, and the fireplace should be enough.
John didn't answer.
Son, be honest, please. The firewood. I didn't have time to stop by the storage on my way back. And by now, by now I won't be able to bring it in. So, there's not enough to last the whole night. Especially if I start now. So I think I'll leave the logs I have for bedtime.
Ned had to actually bite his tongue to keep from crying. He could gather the meaning. Catelyn had barely had enough firewood be left in his room, and John was the one who had to go and get some to be able to be warm through the night. And if he couldn't get it in now, it meant Catelyn couldn't see him bring it in. Oh gods, how had he been so blind?
Oh, Leah, how I have failed our boy.
Ned sighed heavily, resting both his hands on John's shoulders, forcing the boy to look up and into his eyes.
I'm sorry, son. You don't have anything to be sorry for, Father. It's all my fault. No, it isn't. And I'm devastated that you can even think that. That I ever gave you cause to think like this. That you ever had to skip a meal and count on the kindness of servants. I didn't. I was too blind before. But I promise you, it won't happen again. All I got is what I deserve. No, it isn't,
Ned asserted fiercely. It was time his son understood this.
Catelyn shouldn't have done any of it. And I'm sorry I didn't care to check before. I've ordered a new attendant for you, and my own attendant is handling the choosing. The cook and the butler are disavowed from the insanity of giving you smaller portions or inedible food. You may stop by the kitchens whenever you like, but you won't ever leave my table hungry. Not again. And this, he sighed, looking at the room. I was having the chambers next to mine prepared for you and Daenerys to take after the wedding.
John blushed.
You're too kind, Father. You're my son. But I rather think we shan't wait. I'll ask the servants to bring your things to the new room now, as well as plenty of firewood. Now, come, you should get settled, and I have one last thing to take care of before dinner.
Catelyn's apprehension only grew as she neared her chambers, still worried about what would Ned have heard of by now, and what would his reaction be. The Lord's chambers counted with bedrooms for both the Lord and the Lady, their dressing rooms, and a drawing room of sorts, but her handmaiden was waiting outside, and not in her dressing room, as always. "Milady," the woman said, clearly nervous. "Lord Stark, he said, I mean, out with it, Grinda." Catelyn snapped, her anxiousness getting the best of her. "Lord Stark said he wished to speak with you as soon as you returned inside. He's expecting you in his study." Catelyn nodded, though her stomach felt as if it had been tied in knots. She had expected Ned's anger, and had stayed outside as long as she dared, in order to avoid it as much as she could before dinner. Apparently, it hadn't worked as well as she hoped. She made her way to Ned's working place, quickly, being granted entrance as soon as she knocked. "You wish to speak with me?" Ned didn't turn from the window, though it was a bit too chilly to have it open. A few minutes went by before he turned around to face her.
"I thought I could trust my own wife with the running of my household," he said, and his voice was ice cold. "I didn't think I'd be blindsided with mistreatment and neglect. Worse, with cruelty. How could you, Catelyn?"
"How could I what?" Ned snapped, slamming a fist on the table.
"Don't play games with me, Catelyn. I am not in the mood."
"That boy is the symbol of your betrayal."
"That boy is my son!"
Ned shouted, as if the statement was the truest thing he had ever uttered. Catelyn shrank back as the thing scattered on the top of the desk rattled.
"And you're right. Since he is mine but not yours, he does represent my broken vows. He is, however, innocent. What? Do you think he somehow appeared and asked to be born? I'm the one in the wrong, Catelyn, not Jon. Never Jon. And yet you punished him as if he was guilty of a capital crime."
"He is a bastard." Ned breathed harder, losing his patience.
"He is my son. Nothing will ever change that. I hope you understand that. I hope this is the last time this needs to be spelled out for you. Jon is my son, and he will receive the same treatment as Robb, Bran, and Rickon."
He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts.
"I've spoken to Poole and the butler, and I have dispensed with the servants whom you have rewarded for their mistreatment of my son. I have ceased all the petty orders you gave, and if you give out any others, I will take it as a slight against myself. And I have ordered the bed in your room to be made. It will do us good to be apart for a while."
"Are you setting me aside?" Catelyn asked in a trembling voice.
"No, but I am furious with you right now, and I can't trust you. I don't know if I ever will again."
Catelyn nodded, doing a poor job of hiding her tears as she left the room and tore through the corridors towards her room. Grinda, who had been waiting inside, tried her best to console her mistress, but Catelyn was just beyond it. Jon walked into his new chambers after supper to find the fireplace already roaring with a warm fire. He smiled to himself as he looked around the room. No more soot and ashes on his hands as he got the fire going with the torch Poole had left in the corridor next to his room. From what he heard, none of the rooms in Winterfell could be called spacious. But after what he had had, the small dingy chamber that he could barely fit in, this was grand. The bed was clearly meant to fit 2 people. He ignored the warmth at thinking that. And there was a desk for him to supposedly go through letters and missives. In front of the fireplace, there was a big armchair. Next to the little bed a wolf pup had already taken over. And not far, a table that would comfortably seat 4 people if he and Daenerys ever felt like dining in their chambers. On the other side of the bed, a door led to what he presumed was the dressing room, which would connect to the room that would, in name, be Daenerys's. He decided to forego further exploration in favour of sitting on the bed, reaching to feel the linens. They were much finer than his old ones, not scratchy at all. "Testing if we'll be comfortable?" Jon smiled.
I should have guessed you would sneak in here.
Daenerys grinned back. Well, your father has you in the family wing now. That means I can very easily reach you through the service doors.
Jon chuckled. Quite daring of you, princess. What would people say?
I couldn't care less. We're getting married in less than a moon. Let them talk, she said as she came to stand in front of him. Jon, who had been too busy being surprised with the visit, hadn't noticed anything amiss until she dropped her cloak, revealing only a thin silk shift underneath. Against the light from the fire, she was a vision. Dany. She bent to kiss him, making him moan and grip her waist strongly. We shouldn't. It won't make a difference, Jon. We've been waiting too long already. He sighed, feeling his resistance crumbling as she kissed down his neck.
It's the servants. We'll see the blood.
Horseback riding breaks maidenhoods.
It can break it, Mr. Lowen said.
She giggled. Been talking much about it, have you? He groaned as she found a sensitive spot. Anyway, moving on. Crazy kids. Happy for him, but don't want to read that. Benjen made his way down to the crypts. He'd just ridden into the courtyard, and the stable boy, who had come to take his horse, had said Ned had just crossed his way here. So Benjen decided to follow instead of going inside the castle first.
Big brother,
he greeted quietly, joining Ned in front of Lyanna's tomb.
I'm glad you're here, little brother.
Of course I am. You look troubled. Want to talk?
Ned sighed. I've been here for a while, begging her forgiveness, hoping she'll see fit to grant it. I failed her.
He explained at Benjen's frown.
I failed her, and I failed Jon, and I feel like I failed myself.
What happened?
You were right. Catelyn, she was... I don't know why it took me so long to see it. I guess I wanted not to see it, but I ended it.
Benjen clenched his jaw and was silent for a moment. Did you send her back to Riverrun?
No, Ned sighed. I don't. I have 5 children, Benjen, and they need their mother. I stopped her madness, and I'm punishing her for it.
Is that the only reason? Ned took a moment to think.
I don't know. I thought I loved her. Maybe I guess I grew to love her, Benjen. I can't accept she was so horrible to my son. But is it enough to end our marriage? Is it enough to send her away with no chance of reconciliation? If she were to change, I mean, I'd hope. I just don't know right now. 15 years is too long.
And Jon?
He'll be alright now. I got him everything he should have always had.
She'd forgive you, Benjen said, pointing with his head towards Lyanna's statue. Whack you on the head and yell a bit. But she'd forgive you. But whatever happens after we die, Catelyn Tully better hope she never crosses paths with Leah. She won't even know what hit her. Ned snorted and smiled sadly. If there was one thing he was sure of, was that Benjen was right. If Catelyn ever crossed paths with Lyanna in the afterlife, she'd be crossing paths with a very fierce lady wolf who was very protective of her loved ones. And, if she had been given the chance, would have been beyond protective of her pup. Only a fool would bet against Lyanna Stark. Jon smiled as he looked down. Daenerys was sleeping peacefully in his arms, her face serene and calm, her silver hair shining in the light coming through the windows. He heard sounds of life in the corridor and in the servants' passages, and regretfully kissed her forehead, calling her name. Just a bit longer, she mumbled, cuddling more into him.
He chuckled. It's way past sunrise, Dany. You have to go back to your room before anyone notices.
She sighed. Maids always wake me up last. Arya is an early bird and Sansa is too dutiful. I'm the one difficult to rouse.
Jon smiled. Thank you for the advanced warning. Come on, Dany. You know no one can catch you here.
She smiled, opening her eyes. Worried about your virtue?
You know they'd commend me and judge you. You shouldn't have stayed.
It's your fault. Your kisses made my legs turn to jelly. How was I supposed to sneak back to my room?
Jon smirked and felt a surge of masculine pride. Before they could say anything else, there was a knock on the door.
"Milord?"
They both frowned. It was a woman's voice. What is it? Jon called as Dany stood up and put on her robe.
If I could trouble you for a moment of your time?
He cursed under his breath. I'm not yet dressed for the day.
I'm sorry, my lord. I bring a message from your betrothed. I've just been to her room.
They froze, looking at each other. But then Jon threw his tunic back on and allowed entrance.
You're not my maid,
Dany said. The woman smiled gently, starting to pick up the outer layers of Jon's clothes that was still strewn across the room.
No, my lady, she said. I am Isla. Lord Stark made me your housekeeper yesterday, and bid me work with you to organize both the ennobling feast and the wedding. As the kitchens are, well, in an upheaval, to be told, I thought I'd come and introduce myself as I helped you dress for the day. Illa was dismissed, you see. How did you know to look for me here? Daenerys asked.
The woman smiled indulgently.
Call it a lucky guess, milady.
I have to tell you, Jon started.
Oh, don't worry, milord. I know nothing unbecoming happened. Lord Stark raised you too well for that. Besides, you'll be married soon enough. What difference does it make?
Daenerys smiled.
I think we'll be happy working together, Isla. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one.
Oh, I love that. And by the way, Isla is an amazing OC. She's an incredible character. I love her. I didn't know if I would pronounce it Ayla or Isla, but I've seen that name spelled before, and I've heard it when someone pronounced it, and they said Isla, so I'm just going with that. And I just like this, and also the servants all having Jon's back, apart from the ones Catelyn paid, and them all being like, okay, just do enough so that she notices, but then help him out when her back's turned. I love that. You don't mess with a wolf pup unless you want the teeth. And Jon and Dany being sneaky. I love these kids, even though she's only just had her first period, which is a bit icky, but then again they are 15, and back then that's only 1 year away from adulthood. It's iffy, but it's medieval feudalistic fantasy, so you take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, one of her relatives was queen at age 8. Just because they're young doesn't mean they consummate the ceremony, but the sexual stuff's a little iffy. I'm happy for them, but knowing they're related makes it a tad more uncomfortable. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.